Final Fantasy XVI is here. For those of you who have been listening to our podcast, you know how important Final Fantasy is for the both of us. As longtime Square Enix fans, we were excited but nervous for our journey into Valisthea. But after rolling the credits on the game, we can finally answer the question: does Final Fantasy XVI live up to the hype? Later in the episode, we hang up our swords for watering cans as we dive into yet another well-loved game franchise with the remake of Story of Seasons: A Wonderful Life. This is the 20am Podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the 20am Podcast, the podcast where we deep dive into video games and the people behind them. My name is Arief, your co-host for today, as per usual. And let's say hello to the other co-host, Rino. Rino, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing, man? You look absolutely amazing today, I must add.
I was terrified because I thought you were going to actually make fun of me. But now that I'm thinking about that, maybe you could be making fun of me.
No, I'm not. I'm taking on feedback from the last episode where you said I never say nice things about you.
That's true. My feedback for this episode is that if you could compliment me 6 more times, but by episode 14, that'd be great. Rino, I'm so tired because we've been playing a lot of games, and this is a really big episode for us on the 20am Podcast. It is our Final Fantasy 16 review discussion, which is a long time coming. We're huge Final Fantasy fans, but we also got some upcoming stuff that we want to talk about. Another game that is near and dear to our hearts that we want to talk about. But before we get to the Final Fantasy review, how are you doing? Really? How are you?
Pause for murmurs of I'm doing good, I'm doing great from the community. I know now not to answer when Arief asked.
Well, that one I was specifically asking you. I said,
no,
Rino,
you asked me already before, yeah. And then now it's
but
like,
how are you really? You know,
how am I really? Terrible, awful. Why am I here?
Laughs and just entertains the silence beyond that. What have you been up to as of late?
I have been living vicariously through people playing Final Fantasy 16 while still avoiding spoilers. You don't know how hard that line is to thread. I have played the demo at least. I wanted to get a taste for it, which actually just made me regret doing it at all, because now it's like, well, why do I not have a PS5 in my life? But no, it's been really exciting. I feel like the community has been alive, and even people not usually really into games are talking about it. Like, I'm getting text messages from former coworkers, funnily enough, being like, who probably remember that I play games, and they're sending me screenshots of like them playing. I'm like, this is really exciting. It sounds like they achieved, I think that was one of the goals. They achieved something which was about getting more people who don't necessarily play Final Fantasy games to play this Final Fantasy game. And I'm definitely feeling that, at least in my part of the world. What about you?
Yeah, I kind of agree. This whole past week has been taken over by Final Fantasy 16, and nothing else really matters, right? Like, put away our Hawkeye Star Rail dailies. Like, I'm barely tweeting. Like, I'm barely on Twitter. This week has been a little bit insane. I mean, let's just jump into it before we get to the review per se. I mean, I'll share that the lovely folks at PlayStation Asia invited us, the 20am Podcast, to attend the midnight launch of Final Fantasy 16. So my Final Fantasy 16 ride also started like back on Wednesday night, where they had a pop-up in Sunway Pyramid over here in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. There was some awesome stuff that were there. Like, you could play the build of the game, the demo of the game before it launched. You could pick up your midnight copies and the collector's edition. But the best part about it, Rita, let me just say why I'm beaming about this event is because I got to hold Clive's sword IRL and take pictures with it. And this is the coolest feeling thing ever. And the sword was like giant and heavy. And y'all know, I did tweet this one thing. I had to strike a Kingdom Hearts pose.
Of course. I've seen the photos. I've seen the evidence.
Keyblade on the back, a little slouchy. I think I was a little bit too proper, but no, it was awesome. And again, like, a celebration of Final Fantasy. People talk about Final Fantasy. A lot of media folks were there. Good to see some old friends, meet some Twitter friends in real life. So that was an awesome get together.
I really like how everyone is going, oh, I touched Clive's swords, or I posed with Clive's sword. Like, Clive is like real, and this is this is the sword that was actually used in the game. I mean, they even took it so far as to have it displayed in London, right, alongside real swords that were used by real people, which is amazing. It looked awesome.
Yeah, I mean, wish you were here, obviously, but you know that I was just geeking out that entire night, which was really awesome. But no, Final Fantasy 16 is out. Before, maybe, how do we lay up this discussion? We will be going through discussing our thoughts on Final Fantasy 16. But before we go to Final Fantasy 16, I want to lay it up for the newer audience that's maybe watching the 20M podcast that maybe don't know our backgrounds and maybe think that I'm just wearing this Final Fantasy shirt just to pose.
So you want to talk? You want to drop your credentials? Be like,
yeah.
I'm
let's
allowed
validate. Let's validate our Final Fantasy experience. What is your, in a nutshell, what is your Final Fantasy experience? Rino?
Final Fantasy VIII is my Final Fantasy experience. It was my first. It was my favorite, and like if it was my last, I'd be happy for that too. But it's not. I started with 8, then I played 7, then I played 9, then I played 10 and X2. So I've not played anything before 7, and I don't think I've really played. I don't think I can say I've played anything beyond X2 actually, which is pretty funny. But I know you're a big Final Fantasy 14 guy, and some previous titles.
It's like you post. I'm a big post 10 guy, I guess. Like 13 was my first, and I fell in love with it. And I have this whole theory about your first is your favorite, but it got kind of disproved when I was asking people around on the internet over the past couple of days. Love 13, 13-2. I just love that game so much. Never played the OGs back in the day. So retroactively after 13, I went to go back and play them. Final Fantasy 1 ascended to like, I understand why that game's a classic. Absolutely loved it. I played the mobile version after 13. And then obviously played 7 right before 7 Remake. Obviously played 7 Remake. 14 is an interesting one. Recently picked that up. But I think all that to say, it's like, I love Final Fantasy. I've been around it for so long, but I'm a huge Kingdom Hearts guy, for those that don't know, as if you couldn't tell from the beginning of this conversation. So Final Fantasy has always been around, kind of like my upbringing, but I just love this property and this, you know, I get the references, you know what I mean? Like, I get it. You know?
I mean, I think what's funny is that like everyone talks about all the Final Fantasies they've played, but you don't actually need to play any to get the other. They're totally unrelated. It's not some kind of cinematic universe where, oh, I really God hope not. Like at some point they try and tie everything together, like it's all happening in the same place. But yeah, there's a lot of references. There's a lot of vibes, I think, or like aesthetic designs across the games that make it relevant if you've played all of them. You see the progression, I think, of what they've been trying to do, but they are standalone games that exist on their own and don't need to be played with one or the other. It's very cool.
I respect that, and as a Final Fantasy geek, I just have to bring up like Fabula Nova Crystallis, which is that one time, if I'm not mistaken, Final Fantasy fans, let me know in the comments like what that word means to you. But to me, it was like when 13 had its own universe. And like 15 before it became 15 was part of like this Fabula Nova Crystallis thing.
Was like 13, 1, 2, 3 or something, right? And then Noctis, Lightning were all supposed to be part of the same.
Exactly. Yeah. So they were kind of trying a same universe thing before they seconded it. But yes, other than that, like very much. And like we'll not mention God, what's the fighting game? Dissidia?
Dissidia, where
everybody ties in together.
Well, Dissidia's like an isekai, right? They just grab everyone from their own world and throw them into another world. So that's the only way they can make it make sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, now that we've got our Final Fantasy like creds out of the way, just so that people know us, my question, let's start the review discussion portion of Final Fantasy 16, a discussion that I'm really, really excited for. I think let's lay down some ground rules first before we get to it. Number one, I have completed the game. I've finished the game. I've sunk about 30 plus hours into the game.
Well done.
What have you've played
the demo?
That was so terrible.
Played the demo. Yes, I've only played the demo. But I will say I traveled very far to go and play the demo. I had one very kind friend of mine, shout out to Ken, who said, you can come and play the demo at my place, and literally traveled to, I'm not going to say the middle of nowhere, but like just somewhere very far from where I live to play it. And I think my commute time was longer than my time on playing the demo.
The dedication is strong.
But it was so worth it. I definitely wasn't sure if I was going to like 16. And then I think a lot of people probably were skeptical whether they would like it. And then they played a demo, and I think that changed a lot of people's minds as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think It is so interesting. There's so many ways we can start a discussion. I think the second thing we want to mention before is like the game code. Our review code was provided by PlayStation Asia, so major love to them. Disclosure to all those out there. Let's see how should we start this. I want to talk about. Oh, and the third thing that I was going to mention is that we will not be spoiling Final Fantasy 16, or I will also not be spoiling that for Reno. Well, I'll talk about some of the things that maybe my feelings after finishing the game and maybe the overarching thoughts of the game, but I will not be talking about late game story items, and I will not be talking about late game combat stuff either, even though I know that's kind of a flexible one. So just go into this. It's a spoiler free review. Join us if you're a Final Fantasy fan. I think this is going to be a good discussion. If you're new to Final Fantasy, I think, and if you're thinking about picking up the game, this will be a great one. But Reno, I want to start with your thoughts on the initial thoughts on the demo experience, because the demo, for those that don't know, are the first two chapters, the first chapter of the game, first couple chapters of the game, and then you get a extended kind of like demo only gameplay experience. Reno, what did you think about the beginning of Final Fantasy 16?
I was surprised that I liked the world. My initial reservations around it was, as most people know, it's high fantasy. The devs have been very open and transparent about getting inspiration from Game of Thrones. Presumably, like the good part of Game of Thrones, not the bad part of Game of Thrones, which I did watch, which is fine. But I think everyone has a favorite kind of Final Fantasy game, and for me, it was always the post-apocalyptic, semi-sci-fi-ish, like Final Fantasy VIII, where it's kind of like a blend of like the future, but with like some echoes of the past. Whereas this one, I feel is more like, I guess, like Final Fantasy IX, maybe, or is another title, like, I don't know, is it 4? That's kind of like this high fantasy setting as well. So I was really surprised that I liked the world from the get-go. It was very engaging. It was beautiful. And I think the way they set it up and how they tell stories in parallel, so it's not super linear, at least in the beginning for me, going back and forth between Clive's past and where he is now. And you can piece together like why he is the way he is today based on just like clues from the past. So I really like the way they set the beginning up. Very engaging.
Yeah, I mean, just talking about the intro parts of the game, I remember playing the demo the week before the game came out, and it was a punch in the face how similar it was to Game of Thrones. So you're nailing it. You know, as somebody who's watched the shows and like just like the rest of the world, you can so tell it. Like you said, they've been transparent about it, but you can so tell how they're pulling deep inspiration from Game of Thrones, but in a way that I feel like is maybe greater than people think. It's not just the swearing, it's not just the violence. It's this notion, I think, that what that made Game of Thrones so great, which was nobody's safe in Game of Thrones. Like, I think
Absolutely.
in usual fantasies, like, or in usual video games and usual major properties, when people die, it's like, you know, the music swells and like yeah, they have a final speech or whatever. But I know Game of Thrones was one of the first mainstream properties where it's like, if you're dead, like you're just gonna get an arrow to the face and like the main character dies, right? For as an example. And I think similar things happen in the intro in Final Fantasy 16, in my opinion.
There's something in the pacing and the way they set it up that gives you that feeling of anxiety. Like I was sitting there, so my friend Ken had already finished the demo, and I was going through, and he was just watching my impressions. And at every point, I'm like, oh, I bet he's the traitor among us. Or like, oh, I bet it's him. Like I just doubted everyone, and he's just like, all right, you'll see, you'll see. And then as things unfold, obviously there are traitors, but it wasn't someone I expected. But I don't know what it was that made me think I'm not safe. My character's not safe. Like none of us are. There was something about the way that they tell it. Maybe it's because in like the first 5 minutes, someone actually dies, and like I completely forgot that happened. Like I was like, oh, an important NPC, but it was definitely good in creating that we're not in like Candyland anymore. You know, it's high stakes. It's not just because this character has had their time to shine and we're developing their story doesn't mean that they're actually going to be there for the entire time.
Yeah, it's there's gravity to the scenario, right? One thing I want to touch about whilst we're still talking about the intro, like, you know, our intro impressions of the game is combat is very different in previous Final Fantasy. So we talked a little bit about the story here, but this is, you know, they're really embracing, for those that don't know, this is kind of like an action RPG more so than it is a turn-based RPG. And it is very, very active. They've got the person who did the Devil May Cry 5 gameplay system, combat system. So you can so tell it's like deeply inspired by that, like super fast, almost hack and slashy, but in a third-person action game focus kind of dynamic. I have some thoughts on this combat, but what did you think going into maybe experiencing the combat for yourself?
I thought that It was, yeah, very hack and slashy. And I have played some of the Devil May Cry before, and I definitely felt that. But I think the closest relation for me is something that you're gonna love, which is like I totally felt the Kingdom Hearts of it, especially when the boss dies and you get that cinematic slow mo sparkle. I'm like, wow, like I just killed a Heartless.
This game is so Kingdom Hearts, and I know a lot of people get frustrated with me. Like I know you do, I know some of my other friends do. Whenever I say like, "Oh my god, this is such a Kingdom Hearts," like I was like, "Oh my god, that's a Kingdom Hearts like reference or homage," right? But this one is objectively so Kingdom Hearts, right? And in the best ways possible, in my opinion. And yeah, there's so much to it. I want to do a little segment, but do you want to go ahead and continue what you were saying?
I was just gonna say, like, audio listeners, you gotta check out the video to see Arief's beaming face. Like, you're missing out if you're not catching that. The other thing I will share is the accessories, which I'm sure you're going to touch upon as well. I used three of them. I think you can. I think there are three slots, and then there are four available, and they're not accessories in the way that a lot of RPG fans might think that it's equipment stat boost, but it's more like assist to help you play the game. I think for me at that time, I was like, oh, I want to see what this is about because I heard so much about the accessories, and also because I had a limited amount of time playing it at my friend's place. So I was like, I'll just use whatever just so I can progress in the story, and it was quite good. But at the end of it, I think when you've used so many, it's just like the game is just playing itself, which is fine. If you're just there for the story, I think that's cool as well. But I'm sure a lot of people are into their super hard modes and just playing it and parrying it and treating it almost like a Souls like.
Yeah, you're synthesizing so much here, and I'll table the Kingdom Hearts conversation for a later part in the episode. For those that are Kingdom Hearts fans, stay tuned. But it's quite interesting because if you talk about the macro level of Final Fantasy, right? Final Fantasy 15 was the one where they were like, this is for new Final Fantasy fans and old Final Fantasy fans. They even start the game, if I'm not mistaken, with a similar line like that. It's like for newer fans. So I think they've been having a really cognizant. They've been really cognizant about bringing people into the franchise, especially with 15 onwards. And I think 15 did do that. There was a resurgence of 15, especially over the pandemic, with it being available easily on modern consoles. I can't remember if it was on Game Pass or not, but like 15 really brought back this culture of like mainline Final Fantasy. But you're right, they're continuing this without beating it over your head like 15 did. So the rings and the combat is super interesting because I've heard a lot of complaints about, the game is too easy or it's too different from Final Fantasy, but to me, it just gives flexibility to your playthrough. It's like if you aren't looking for something super Souls-like you mentioned, and super tactical, I feel like some of those abilities can ease that part of the game for you. But at the same time, it's like just turn them off if you're somebody who's looking for some of that more action-oriented combat and tactics, right? So that's what I did. I remember when I first played, I was like, oh, the auto dodges, you can use magic automatically, and it'll combo automatically. I was like, it's not moving in the way that my brain wants it to work. So I swap those abilities out, and then all I have to say is that I love this combat system. I'm a huge fan of whenever they iterate on it. Final Fantasy 13, I think. So Final Fantasy 7 Remake had probably the best combat system in a Final Fantasy game. And it was only because it took inspiration in part from Final Fantasy 13 as well, for the record. But this one, I think, is in a whole different league, and it takes so much from Kingdom Hearts and Devil May Cry, and it's just a beautiful medley of those things. I'm not sure if it's the perfect combat system. I think there are a little bit of complaints, but oh my God, like whenever I see somebody complain about it, I'm just like, dude, wait till you get 20 hours into the game and it's just muscle memory where you're barely looking at the UI systems. It's when you're fighting and you're parrying, you're using one icon ability, you're tying it up to another icon ability that synergizes with that first icon ability. Your dodges are getting more precise. You're reading the enemy moves a lot better. It is the beauty of a JRPG and its optionality, but also, I guess, just in its action as well. So I really loved it.
I think it's really hard to juggle, I guess, two very polarizing ways of thinking. There's a lot of people who want that classic RPG style where it's your turn-based or you're choosing and you're thinking about your moves carefully. And there's another base of fans who are just like hack and slash. You just want to get into it. I don't want to be paused by having to make a decision every single time. So it's hard to really sort of appease both while you're trying to widen your fan base. So I totally understand this sort of direction. There's been a lot of commentary on the internet being like, how do they even call this an RPG? There's nothing about this as an RPG, but it's a very delicate balance I think they need to strike.
Yeah, and I think to those comments, and like I said, we're a little bit later. We've seen a couple of those reactions online. We've seen a couple of reviews online. We've seen a lot of people discuss it, right? But I think I agree. There, it is a lighter JRPG than other ones. But I saw this other tweet that said like Final Fantasy is kind of going in that been in that direction for a little while. So there aren't as deep, mechanics and JRPG mechanics and RPG mechanics as other games that I think are non-Final Fantasy these days. But what I will say is that I think it accomplishes what previous main entry titles couldn't in its combat. So Final Fantasy 15, I think, iterated on this like more active combat mechanic, but I think 16 perfects what 15 couldn't, where it is fast, it is quippy, you can move around faster. I think there are some moves that are directly stolen, but it just works for me. So again, I just go back to the adage where when it makes sense, and it is the most Souls-like experience ever, where like people say in Souls games, like when the combat clicks, it clicks, but when it doesn't, right? It was a very similar experience for this for me, even though it was a gradual build. So I fell in love with it. Maybe another part where we can talk about this is the world and the story. High fantasy. It is very much different than again, like you said, more akin to a Final Fantasy IX. What are some of your initial reactions to the setting of Final Fantasy 16, Valencia, and the characters in the world? Everybody has a British accent. Like, what are your reactions to that?
I think the character, I really liked everyone that I met in the demo, and they did a very, I don't know, something with the storytelling and the dialogue and everything that just made me really care about all of them, about Clive and his pain, about Joshua and the level of responsibility he feels. Like, it echoed in my mind. And as I was going home and the days after, I just kept thinking about them, which is really special. Like, as someone who's been playing, like, I mean, no shade to games like Star Rail or Genshin Impact or anything, but I play those games for a very different purpose. And it's been really hard to articulate to people when they're like, oh, Genshin Impact is like your favorite game of all time. Like, no, it's actually not. It's Final Fantasy VIII, and it's hard to explain by just saying, oh, story and characters. But when you, I think when you're like, when you feel hooked and actually engaged with the characters, there's a feeling of like, yeah, it's like I think about them almost like you think about a friend, from time to time, which is kind of weird. I really like that. But there was one part which I will talk about in the demo that really made me mad. It was
what was it?
I don't know what it's called now. It's called, in the past it was called Marlboro.
Oh my god! I just had this discussion with somebody yesterday.
When it came out,
it's called a marble in this game.
I think some people knew about it because it was in the demo, like in some trailers, but I hadn't seen it before. So when it appeared to me, I was like, "Oh my god, I'm so angry! Why are you still here? You have like plagued me my whole life." Because in Final Fantasy VIII, it does the bad breath move just like it does it in 16. But bad breath, I think maybe it's the same across all games. But it does like a million status effects on your characters, and you just lose all control of them, and then they just slowly die because you can't do anything. They're like confused, so they hit themselves. They're like blind, so when they hit the enemy, they miss. They're like, what's the other one? Like rage or something, where they're just like constantly only doing like auto attacks. And I was like, oh my god, if you do this to me right now, I will lose it. But it was different. It played out differently in 16, so I was okay.
Yeah, I thought you were going to bring up how it's called a marble than a Marlboro. Apparently, there's some like iterations with they are both, but just the consistency, man, it like ruins it for me. Yeah, maybe to jump off of that, like I was going to say that Final Fantasy 16, like Final Fantasy 16 is an homage to older Final Fantasy games that no other mainline Final Fantasy has achieved thus far, where it is not just these small Easter eggs and references. And I've seen a lot of people talk about like, oh, the goblins are the first enemy you fight because historically, they're the first enemies you would typically fight. Like, yes, that is there, and yes, other Final Fantasy games have weapons like Excalibur or chocobos and just like these like
Sid.
These things, these things in the world where they are references to previous Final Fantasy games. But the magic of 16, in my honest opinion, is that it culminates all these references and gives it so much meaning. Where there are references to Final Fantasy V in this game. There are references to Final Fantasy 13. There are references to Final Fantasy 7. There are references to 8, which I was shocked because I haven't played 8. I just know it by my friends, right? And it's not just references where there are things in the world and they just kind of sit there and there may be characters or whatever, but and I don't want to talk about this too much, but if you talk about the philosophy of what Final Fantasy 16 is trying to say and the things that they do and the characters they bring in and how they go through this journey, it is so Final Fantasy. It is like it's almost as if it's you mash up all the previous Final Fantasy mainline titles into one. There are things that you can take out of it from 16, which is the most shocking thing to me. So outside of maybe the first level of it, which is the world and Clive and Joshua and this cast of characters and Storm and Ash, the continents, and maybe the war that is happening. At its heart, it is the most Final Fantasy game that I've played in a long time, which is so weird to even say and conceptualize. So I love it.
Yeah. I do want to ask you about the music because you've played a lot more, so you've experienced more. For me, and in the demo, there were 2 points that really caught me off guard. There was one part where the melody is exactly like 7. It's like the harp. I guess we'll put something up here to illustrate what I mean. And the second part is the combat music, which is very similar to Final Fantasy VIII's combat music, which just made me feel right at home. But I'm sure you've got many more thoughts about the music that plays throughout the rest of the game.
Yeah, and I will say, like, we just talked about Yoko Shimomura in a previous episode of the podcast. If you want to check out our Nintendo, commentary there, where I think, Uematsu Shimomura has always kind of been revered as Final Fantasy composers. But now I think Soken is just on another level where, Soken was the one who did 14 as well, a lot of the music for 14, and you could hear a lot of the epicness in it. But oh my God, when people are talking about this on Twitter, I cannot verify it enough. Like, you think you've heard stuff in the trailer. There are some moments in this game where the music is already at 100 out of 10 and he elevates it to a 200 out of 10 and you're overwhelmed by this level of epicness just exclusively via the music. But outside of people are going like, yeah, Soken's going crazy, and it's like, that whole commentary on the internet, this is also one of the most intimate sounding Final Fantasies in a long time, where the emotion that he sells in is just simple piano renditions where that overlays a cutscene is so beautiful. It reminds me again of older JRPGs, if you will, where it's really about the melody rather than a major composition. But also this aspect, Reno, where the reason why I want Final Fantasy fans to play this game is because you nailed it. There's references to previous Final Fantasy games in the music. There's a town song that reminds me so much of one of the 15 town songs, and it's no coincidence because I'm sure it elicits similar emotions. But dude, the fact that the main theme is present, like the major Final Fantasy themes, if you will, whether it be battle, whether it be the the end of the thing.
That's so good. Yeah, the fanfare.
It's there. You hear the arpeggio, the intro arpeggio at every other major scene, and it really brings it back to, again, when I say it's an homage to Final Fantasy games, it feels like a Final Fantasy because they use the music that Final Fantasy will use, which is really weird because other Final Fantasy games, I feel like they go a bit more for original compositions, where this one is like, nope, we're going to remind you that this is a Final Fantasy story and this is a Final Fantasy game, and all the music that you know and love is present to this game, even though they're a newer rendition or it sounds a little bit different. And there's parts that just make my heart sing, and parts that I feel so emotional because you're reminded of that in its melodies.
They've got they got Yonezu as well, like Kenshi Yonezu. I think the song is called Moon Gazing, like Tsuki o Miteita, which I haven't heard yet, but I've seen a lot of hype about it on Twitter. And for those who might not be aware, he also sang Kickback, the opening for Chainsaw Man, and a whole bunch of other stuff. He's a pretty celebrated artist here in Japan, so it's cool to have that sort of pop music element to it as well.
Yeah, that's I think I know the one you're talking about. Remember when Leona Lewis did the soundtrack for Final Fantasy 13? That was a wild one. Huh? The main song for Final Fantasy.
I did not remember that. Really?
Yeah, the intro sequence of Final Fantasy 13 is Leona Lewis. Florence and the Machine doing Final Fantasy 15. Like, come on.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was going to bring up Final Fantasy 8, we got Faye Wong. She sang Eyes on Me. That's kind of pop. I think that was very mainstream pop back then.
Maybe before we talk about some of the other things I want to touch base, I want to go through some things I love. But before I get to some things I love, I want to talk about the limitations of this game. Because as much as I love this game, when people asked me, let's say 2/3 through the game, how my experience was with, people texting me and just colloquially asking and things like that, I was, and I think I told this to you, I was like, I have some takes about this game and I have some thoughts about this game. So I want to make sure to acknowledge that, even though my end experience is quite different. But 16, I know you haven't played 14. But Final Fantasy 16 takes the best parts of Final Fantasy 14 and the worst parts of Final Fantasy 14. So much so that like I'm quite transparent in what I say. It's like I'm not loving 14. I've played up until I'm just right before Endwalker, which is the latest expansion. So I'm not fully completed the experience, but I don't like certain things about 14, and there are some reasons why I'm never going to fall truly in love with 14, and I'm so frustrated that some of those stuff is in 16. To be specific, accepting quests should not take this long in a Final Fantasy game. Like when you accept a quest, it does a whole like da-na-na, and then the quest accepted, and then it like pauses for a bit, and then it goes. It's like in 2023, we should just accept quests and it should just pop and it should just go.
Yeah.
You know, like we don't have to take that on. And then the second thing is like talk about quests. Why are there still fetch quests in 2023 and fetch quests that don't matter ultimately? Where we've already had The Witcher 3 come out, we've already had so many games that have learned off of this aspect that side quests are no longer what we think of side quests in modern gaming, where side quests have consequences. Side quests can give story. Side quests can give further incentive than just EXP and cash and things like that. I don't understand why Final Fantasy, like the team behind Final Fantasy 16 and Final Fantasy 14 are so like they harp on fetch quests so much, and it is my biggest gripe with Final Fantasy 14. And at 16, there was a 2/3 through the game where I feel like I picked up so many quests that were so inconsequential, and half of them were also fetch quests, that I was just like, what the heck am I doing here, man? Like this almost ruined the experience for me, because it's so weird how you have that in the game, and then to offset that, you also have some side quests that are like so consequential and matter so much, you know, and like add so much value to your playthrough and your gameplay. So it's just this weird dichotomy of like they're stuck in the old of this thing they won't let go of, but they have the new. And I feel like just that the fact that both are present kind of makes the 2/3 of the experience a little bit, just demotivating for me. But at least they are learning from it, I guess. So that's like a major limitation for me.
Are they very superficial? Because I know like with fetch quests, like some of the objectives can be like, do you get a bit of lore tidbits from talking to an NPC, or it's the devs trying to get you to explore an area that you don't normally would. But I understand that frustration, and I'm having that with some games I'm playing at the moment as well. But do you feel like they're very superficial in 16?
It's a 50-50. To me, it's so weird how it's a coin toss, where I think, and again, maybe it goes to the story as well, like 2/3 through the game, I think the story really dips, where it's not as strong as the beginning and the end. But it's so odd how some side quests are the epitome of great side quests that are, really meaningful and non-superficial. And then you roll to the next one, you're like, okay, I can't wait to do this. And you pick it up and it's just like, I'm just going to that area to fight an enemy and then talk to 3 people before I can complete it. Like there's nothing here, So it is, maybe the roll of the dice is their weird psychological way to get you playing more, because it's like, oh, you should do the side quests even though like half of them are crap. It's like, because half of them might really, like there are cutscenes that are exclusively for the side quests that really impact it. But also like the care, it's again so weird, because there are things that you can experience in a side quest that's one piece of dialogue or one item, like a description of an item you read, that has major lore implications or tells you a lot about the world and the story. So you can tell they care about it and crafting it. It's just, why are there so many fetch quests? Like I don't understand. Like they're still here.
I don't know. I feel like it's always devs being like, oh, it's meant to imitate real life, where some people you talk to are wonderful and some people you talk to are pointless. But that's the roll of the dice. That's what it means to live. I feel like that's just maybe a throwaway comment they might make about it. But okay, yeah. I totally understand that.
And then I think just on the other side, whilst we're on this Final Fantasy 14 thing, just for those that have played 14, I also think it takes the best part of 14, where it's so clear how the AoE attacks for some enemies is similar to the way Final Fantasy 14 does AoEs, where you have to stand in a certain area, you have to dodge a certain thing. Like the philosophy of the combat and fighting a boss is very similar. I think the character getting a headache and getting a vision is literally a direct take from 14. So there's like so many, there's like little music, there's a little jukebox in the main world. Like there's so many things that you can tell that it's a 14 game. But like I said, there's also so many things that make it a Kingdom Hearts game, whether it be we know the Kingdom Hearts team worked on Final Fantasy 16. Like the pairing mechanic, I was just talking about this with a friend, where in Kingdom Hearts 1, they literally tell you to fight Riku and to parry Riku's attack by attacking when he attacks. That mechanic exists in this game. There is a specific icon ability that I don't want to talk about for spoiler reasons, but the main ability from that icon is literally a mechanic from Kingdom Hearts 3, Kingdom Hearts 2, Kingdom Hearts 3. So it's like, it's just so funny how you can tell that the like it's so clear how Final Fantasy Kingdom Hearts is influencing this Final Fantasy, where I feel like in previous iterations, Kingdom Hearts has always been a culmination of Final Fantasy. So it's beautiful to see these two Square properties at play on that side of things. Before I conclude this segment of just like references of other games and whatnot, Reno, there's a lot of games that have come out over the past couple of years, and one of them being God of War, one of like probably the most influential AAA game reinvention of a character. This game is so much like God of War, it's insane. Like the way the limit break ability is not like previous limit breaks, I guess, in the Final Fantasy that you're used to. It's not a summon, it's not like enhances, I guess, like a different move set or whatever have you. You just become ultra strong and the screen goes red and it heats up and you're just attacking the creature. That's literally the Spartan Rage in God of War.
So you're just like a OP version of yourself. You're not
Exactly.
doing anything. Okay. Interesting.
Exactly. It's more powerful. It multiplies your moves and whatnot. But it is just so cool to see Final Fantasy developers get inspired from major games of our generation and kind of take that and repurpose that in their game. But I would just be remiss. There's probably other God of War references that I remember taking notes down on that I can't remember, but it's just like it is a modern Final Fantasy game that's learning from Western games, and I think it wants to be a Western game itself while still being a Final Fantasy title. Man, there's so much I could say about it. Maybe my last note before I kind of ask you if there's any other things that you're curious of, or what would be good to talk about, is talk about the best things about this game. Sid is the best character. This
Sid
is the best Sid
okay,
in any Final Fantasy game, and it is ridiculous. Like, let's talk about Sid for a second. Like, what are some memorable Sids in the Final Fantasy franchise?
Sid from 7 is my favorite Sid. Sid from 8 is actually pretty bad. Sid from 8 is like this frumpy headmaster who just like, I don't know, for no reason whatsoever, just like, I'm dipping. Squall, you're the new head of this entire school. Good luck. And he's like 18. He literally graduated like 2 months ago. But Sid from 7, I love. I just love the way he plays and how funny he is and how obsessed he is with his ship. But do you want to tell us a little bit about 16's Sid?
Yeah, 16's Sid is a Sid we've never seen before. He is this beautiful hunk of a man, and I mean this in a way where it is so objective how attractive he is. Like, it's just so, and I mean that in a way where it's like, obviously the character looks great, right? But it's like it's in his charisma, where to me Sid is always like a grumpy old mechanic. It's kind of like what they did with Final Fantasy 15. It's like, why is everybody like a K-pop like boy bandy? Yeah, like why is everybody hot? Like, it just doesn't make sense. But like this Sid is so beautiful to me because on one side you have that aesthetic aspect, you have like people fawning over Sid as a character, but this Sid has so much heart, and it makes me so emotional when I think about Final Fantasy 16, where Sid is at the heart of Final Fantasy, where I feel like Sid is often a side piece and dressing for Final Fantasy, where this completely flipped it on it. The voice performance is phenomenal. The writing for Sid's character is phenomenal, but also the context in which why this Sid exists in the world is beautiful, and obviously later story implications is just it just makes me so emotional, and it makes me so happy that you can take a Final Fantasy character that is known and beloved, if you will, but elevate them to a level where they are even more known and beloved. It is just, again, the beauty of these franchises, in my opinion. I think undoubtedly the best thing about this game that people are going to remember for years to come is Sid as a character.
That makes so much sense, because just before we started this call, one of my friends, Audrey, who's like a huge Final Fantasy fan, she's been tweeting about it a lot. And I've been kind of trying to avoid them because a lot, like she spoiler tags, but I'm just like, all right, I'll just skim. But there was one that was like, she looked into like some popular hashtags for the game in Japan, and it was like ship hashtags. So like Clive and whoever. And there was one that said Sid and Clive, and I was like, what? It's like, oh, okay. Maybe differences, but now after hearing your explanation that he's got Riz and he looks like a K-pop star, I'm like, okay, maybe that makes sense. That's why that's trending in Japan.
It's kind of funny. It's like, it's not the K-pop star. It's that like, he's like burly man, just super deep voice, but like slim and fit and that kind of stuff. So it's just like, it's just so weird. It's like, I remember when they did this with Sid in Final Fantasy 15, where they made her a mechanic who was like barely wearing any clothes. It's just super chirpy. And it's like, oh, you're going for that kind of like, you're just trying to appease the like, Sid can be hot, but like in this kind of like, I don't know, Maxim photo shoot like mechanic kind of way. Now it's like, oh, Sid can be hot if he's like a British dude that's like super proper yet hyper charismatic. So it's a funny. I just love Final Fantasy how they can do
I
this.
just
But
wonder where the Sid inside joke starts. Like, oh, hey, let's just make a character named Sid in every game. And then now we're at this point. It's like Sid is everyone. Sid is anyone.
yeah, exactly. Let me ask you, before we kind of close out our Final Fantasy 16 segment here, what do you have any questions about Final Fantasy 16 or any areas that you think we haven't touched base on yet in our review discussion?
I don't want us to, obviously, very cognizant of spoiler territory, but in the demo, I felt so overwhelmed at the depictions of the icons because obviously they're called summons, they're called guardian forces, they're called aeons and all across Final Fantasy, but they're basically the summons that the characters can use. And just I guess to see them like larger than life and have such wild personalities. And obviously that scene between the Free and Phoenix was very, I don't know, overwhelming, shocking, kind of grotesque at the end. But does it get better? Does it get worse? Like how does it play out with the icons in the rest of
It
the game?
gets, and this is where again it comes to the limitations about this game, right? It gets worse, and it also gets better. And by worse, I mean it is so. How do I say this? The icon battles, I guess, for those that are unfamiliar, and we can prop some B-roll probably as you're watching this on YouTube. For those that are watching this, like it is. I think how to describe it. It's like you take the form of the icon, the summons, and then it just becomes like a kaiju, like action game where you're a giant beast fighting another giant beast, and it's so non-Final Fantasy, right? But it's so weird because I feel like this is the most they've respected summons in any Final Fantasy game, where they're not a side thing. They're not just these things that are at the behest of these holders that can control the summons. They are living entities. And I think Final Fantasy 15 was gearing in this direction where the summons in that one have greater story implications. I think they do that as well in 16. But yeah, I remember the first time I was playing the opening segments of this game where shortly after the demo, where there are two fights early in the game that are cinematic. One of them is gameplay, one of them is just like a cutscene where you feel the magnitude of a giant summon hovering over the battlefield. And it's such a cool, like, this goes back to this thing where I wanted to bring up how this game is not only inspired by Game of Thrones, but a lot of known fantasy properties, where it just reminds me of things like Lord of the Rings, where there are things that are just like larger than life and things that just shouldn't exist, can only exist in fantasy worlds, yet they can craft these things in a way that's so grounded. Final Fantasy 16 does that as well. So it really reminds me of these epic set pieces. But I guess as it pertains to the summons, there are some like icon battles that I think are pretty mediocre, where there's a lot of like, how would you say, fireworks around something that maybe isn't as great that we should be celebrating. So I just think there are some battles that are like a little bit boring, and some of them that they look like a PS2 game, like in its gameplay. Like, you know what I mean, like gameplay wise, not like the graphics. Graphics are obviously beautiful.
I see.
And then as soon as I feel that, you get to the next icon battle, and it is the most epic like sequence you've ever played in games history. Like when I say the highs are high, Reno, the reason why I want some Final Fantasy fans to play this is I want to watch people stream this. I want to watch people stream like the latter half of this game. I want to watch people like react to these battles, because dare I say, this is the most epic game that I think I've ever played. And I mean that in the way that it's like epic in its truest form. The music is epic, the sequences are epic, the cinematics are epic, the gameplay is epic. It is just, and it's all thanks to the summons and the icons. So I think rightly brought up positives and negatives, I guess, with this title.
I think I know that my earlier comment was like Final Fantasy is nothing like Marvel Cinematic Universe, but in that same vein of like getting to see Ifrit over the years in different Final Fantasies, and then seeing him here as this huge beast doing his own thing, fighting his own battles, it was like, wow, it's like same guy, the guy I grew up with. In a way, you just kind of feel a sense of nostalgia at the same time. So such a great way that Final Fantasy has kept their games separate but still iterated over similar themes throughout the years. Are there any tiny icons? I spoiler because I've only seen the epic ones. I'm like, where's my carbuncle? Where's my Moogle? Where's my, all the little guys who do what they can?
Moogles are in the game, okay. So they're there. They showed that off at a previous thing as well. No, who cares about that? No, I'm just kidding. Maybe the things that are present.
There's no cactuar.
Well, so here's the thing. It's like I haven't done a completionist run about it, but there's these things called the hunt board in the as you get through the game, where you can hunt like characters in Final Fantasy. Monsters in the world that are characters of older Final Fantasy games and references to them. So there might be characters that I've yet to experience. You know what I mean? But let me tell you the joy that like I look at the hunt board and I see a little thing. It's like, oh my god, that's a thing, right? Or you're going through the world and you're a different iteration of this thing, or it's a boss battle that is totally the most Final Fantasy of Final Fantasy characters that pops up. Like they exist, just perhaps not in the summons.
All right, very exciting. Lots to look forward to.
Yeah, I'm super excited. I guess to close my section of Final Fantasy 16, it is so weird how much I love this game and how much I felt frustrated midway through my playthrough. But I think somebody was right by saying, I think if you take time with this game and you do the side quests and you experience everything, it is a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful experience. And all my qualms with the game, like I said, all the micro details that I felt frustrated with, by the end of the game, when you experience where the story goes, where the gameplay is, and again, on a higher level, what Final Fantasy 16 is trying to say, it is so beautiful. And the thing that I was asking myself throughout this entire playthrough is that, does it have the magic? Does it have the magic of, does it feel like the first time I felt playing 13? Does it feel like Final Fantasy 10? Does it feel like Final Fantasy 1, right? And I was getting so nervous, and like throughout my playthrough, I was questioning it. But by the time you end the game, by the time you roll credits, and by the time you culminate your experience, it is the most Final Fantasy game ever, and I love it to death for that reason. It has its limitations, and there are things to complain about it, and it does take inspiration from outside Final Fantasy, but at the end of the day, I really want Final Fantasy fans to play this one so I can talk about it. And goddamn, there's so many references that I can't wait to talk about with people on an upcoming potential spoilery conversation. Yeah. God bless Final Fantasy. God bless this. Like, I'm so glad it exists. I think that's it. Like, to our Final Fantasy segment. That was a hefty one, but I'm so glad I got to talk about my love for this franchise.
Yeah, and congrats, Arief, on finishing it in record speed. I know you lost many hours of sleep, socializing, and general life things to get to the end of the game. So well done.
Yeah, we'll see. There's another Final Fantasy event that's coming up. So before I conclude my time spent on Final Fantasy 16,
it's still got a hole in your life.
Yeah, we've got one more Final Fantasy 16 event, and you all want to stay tuned to see some of that stuff. But enough about Final Fantasy. Rino,
what have I been playing while everyone is playing the most epic game of the year?
Let's talk about like pure nostalgia. Let's talk about games that mean so much to the gaming population and maybe are some of the forefathers of this medium, Final Fantasy being one of them. What is the other one of them, Rina?
So while everyone has been frolicking in Valencia with Clive and all the epicness, I have been playing Story of Seasons, A Wonderful Life, the remake. So this is a remake of the classic Harvest Moon Story of Seasons, which also got, I think, a remaster a couple of times for PlayStation 2 and also for PlayStation 3 and 4. They had its own port. But this is a proper remake, so a lot of things have changed in the game. How familiar are you with Harvest Moon / Story of Seasons?
We talk about this every episode. I am so not a Harvest Moon Story of Seasons guy. I'm a Stardew Valley bastard.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I love Stardew Valley with my heart. And it's just because I never grew up with Harvest Moon. So that's maybe because I'm jealous of it. So I don't know anything about it except for it's like a more comprehensive, I don't know if that's fair to say, but like it's different from Stardew at the end of the day, but Stardew obviously takes so much from Harvest Moon. How does this is this a pure 1-for-1 remake? Like what is the relationship between a newer iteration of this game and the ones that I guess most of the people that are probably listening grew up on?
Well, there's a really annoying bit of history to it, but I'll try and summarize it as well as I can as to why this is a remake of Harvest Moon, but it's not called Harvest Moon. So I'm sure you've heard some of the legal, whatever, boring details. But basically, Harvest Moon, the original game, was produced by Marvelous, and the localization rights to North America went to a company called Natsume. So Natsume was able to distribute outside of Japan. And then later on, Marvelous had a subsidiary called Xseed, and then Xseed was supposed to look after the North American distribution and so on. but Natsume still had the holding rights for the name Harvest Moon. So in Japan, it's called something else. In Japan, it's called Bokujo Monogatari. So there's this issue where Marvelous is still making the game, but they don't have the rights to the name Harvest Moon, which everyone is aware of, is iconic. It's the farming game. And so they started making the games under the name Story of Seasons moving forward. But the issue is Natsume was still making Harvest Moon games, even though they're making games called Harvest Moon, but they are not Harvest Moon games. And they look exactly the same. As in the characters, there's like a boy version, a girl version, they're wearing blue overalls. It's almost as if like someone out there made a game called Last Fantasy, and the main character's name was Clove, and they looked exactly the same, but everything else about it is like the mechanics are bad, the farming game is bad, like it's awful. But anyway, so now Story of Seasons is the way you want to recognize. If you're a fan of Harvest Moon, or if you want to play Harvest Moon like games that are modern, look out for the name Story of Seasons, because that's the actual developers who made the original and who are iterating on the same style of it. So it's a TLDR of how it is.
And does it hold up? Like, despite the legal, hullabaloo, the back and forth, and like the fact that this property is such in a weird state, like with your experience, does it hold up? Does this mechanic? It is the farming sim to end all farming sims, right? The farming sim that started it all, if you will, to many. Like, does it hold up?
I think in the vein of remakes, it definitely does. So I also played the remake of Harvest Moon, Friends of Mineral Town, which is like the OG first story. I played that last year, I think. And in the same vein, so they've made a lot of really modern updates, and there's a lot more customization. So one I really want to call it is, of course, your main character is gender fluid. So you can choose whatever pronouns you want: he, her, he, him, she, her, they, them. The only thing is you're locked in once you choose one. That's kind of it. Like you can't play around with it. But this is such a big step over the original title, where it's not even like you can choose a boy or a girl. Some of the original games, you're just a boy. If you want the girl version, you got to buy the girl version, which came out much later. And then this one, you can customize how you look throughout the game. So today you want ponytail, you get a ponytail. Tomorrow you want to have a red short hair, just like a male presenting dude. You can do that as well. So I think that's really important. And that also extends to who you can romance in the game. So a big part of Harvest Moon Story of Seasons is getting to know the characters in the game and eventually marrying someone. In the past, again, if you're playing as a male presenting character, you only marry female characters and vice versa. But in this one, you can marry anyone. So whatever they look like, whoever tickles your fancy, it's great how inclusive I think they've made the game. Obviously, more steps to go with, greater skin color customization and so on like that. But great first steps in that sense.
I love it because I think they're learning a lot from other games as well, where I feel like farming sims and these kind of more life sims are a safe space for more marginalized communities that are out there. And I think there's just a growing trend in this specific genre to be inclusive. So it's so beautiful to hear that, like, again, this Temple franchise, this Legacy franchise is embracing some of that newness.
There's a lot of great updates to quality of life as well. In the original farming games, so you're farming, you pick up your harvested cabbage and you put it in your bag, and you pick up your tomato, you put in your bag. Like there's this very fluid sort of you get the muscle memory of how to do that action. But so many times I've just dropped my vegetable on the floor and it's just gone. In the game, and not only that, in the game it treats it as if you're littering, and then your overall standing in the city, in the town, goes down because you just litter. And I'm like, oh my god, that was money for this week. I get so upset. In this game, they've gotten rid of that, so there's very little chance of being not very dexterous and just dropping stuff everywhere. That's fine. They also have shortened the season cycles. So normally it's each season is 20 or 30 days, like summer, spring, winter. Now it's only 10 days. I don't know if it's because it's also just gamers don't have the willingness to grind. But now summer is 10 days, spring is 10 days. And then the plants are not just summer only, they're summer and spring. So your crops will last longer and they take less time to grow. And there's you can experience more things in the game. So it's not such a long grind to get to the next part of your life, which is good, I guess, for people who are trying to get into it and they don't want to spend 3 months before they're able to afford a cow because it took them so long to harvest turnips and their turnips died and things like that. So it's a bit of an easier grind in that sense. So I guess it's more accessible for new players to the farming grind.
That's so
Really.
cool. I mean, it's just funny. It's like, I don't have too much experience with the genre, but like a lot of those things where some of them is interesting, like the shorter cycle. But then the other thing where like crops can kind of live via multiple seasons. It's like, oh, that's like, I mean, not a terribly new mechanic. And also logically it makes sense. But again, these iterations are evolving this particular genre. I'm curious, do you think this is a title, just like out of curiosity on my side, like, is this a title where people should, like, people who love the genre should play this one? Or like, do you think it is at that top tier of farming sim, kind of like life sim, get away from the city kind of video game? Or I'm just so curious how, just personal curiosity, like how it stacks against other more modern titles that aren't Story of Seasons, right? Harvest Moon.
I think for me, I'm a very, like, I like my games very kind of simple. And I guess because I've had the experience of playing this as a kid, like, this is what I know and what I like. I get very overwhelmed easily if there are too many things that I can do. I know there's a lot of farming sims out there where you can do like aqua farming, or you spend more time in the water, which is very cool for people who are more inclined that way. Or you have like 10 different types of barn animals. Like, I'm pretty satisfied with just having like my cow, my sheep, my chickens, my dog. It's just a very simple. I think what is important for me in these games is like, firstly, with the mechanic of farming, it has to be such a delicate balance of, it has to be addicting, so you don't mind doing it, but it's not tiring. You don't want it to actually feel like work. And I think that's why the little upgrades they've made this time make it easier, and it's more forgiving to players who might make mistakes. And then also with the farming, they have made it a little bit more complex. So now you get your animals are gendered. So before you just have cows and you feed them miracle potions and then they can get pregnant and have like baby cows. But now you can have like cows and bulls, and then if they spend time together, they can just get naturally pregnant, which is cool, I think, and more reflective of real life, I suppose. But it just means like you've got a whole bunch of dude animals who actually don't contribute to your farm other than I literally have this problem right now. I have 3 female chickens and 1 cock, and he's just not doing anything aside from just being himself.
Get it together, man. You know what I mean? Like, people rely on you, god damn it. Like,
the characters, I think characters are also really important. So the way that they look and how much you relate to them, and who you actually like. Because when I first played A Wonderful Life way back on the original one, I found all the guys like highly unattractive, and I just couldn't bring myself to spend time with them. And I thought, I'm just gonna not marry. I'm gonna focus on my career. But the game actually punishes you in that sense. I think you do need to get married if you want to progress to the next level, like within a year. And then this time they've given some of the characters like a facelift. So there's a character named Gustafa. In the original game, he looks like a bridge troll. In the new game, he just looks like a tortured artist, slightly rugged. I'm like, okay, I'll take that. Marlon used to look like an Elvis Presley impersonator. Now he just looks like a brooding anime dude, and his name is Matthew, not Marlon. Yeah. Okay. Just little things like that made the men in this series more appealing to me. But the girls are all still very cute, very, very interesting. They all got different characters as well. The last thing I will add that this series has versus like the other Harvest Moon Story Seasons games is that when you have a child, you can actually grow. Like, your child will grow up with you, and depending on what you expose your child to, like who your friends are, it will kind of determine their career. So if you're really good friends with the farmer next door, and you're hanging out with them a lot, and the child spends a lot of time with them, then there's a high likelihood that your child will become a farmer as well. Or if you hang out with the mad scientist in town, your child might become more sciencey and maybe like have a career in the city, things like that. And if you follow like guides, it actually tells you like from this point on, like it's cemented. They've decided on their career, and you can't change it like that. So there's more of a sense of a passage of time in this game, whereas I think in other previous Harvest Moon games you just farm indefinitely. But in this game, like characters grow up, characters grow old, and you can die as well, which is quite. I think it's quite.
What does that mean? I've seen this online, but what does that mean?
It means that like you have your whole like death sequence, and and the friends that you like. If you've made good friends in in the town, they come and they mourn for you, and there's like a bit of an ending sequence where because you come here to the town because your father's friend invited you. So your father's friend has always been this guy who supports you. So at the end, I think he kind of like does a reflection and is like, oh, your father would be proud of you and things like that. But then after that, there's a heaven mode where you can play indefinitely, no one dies. I think the only difference is like things that have a sense of time passing, like your child, that they don't exist in the heaven mode. But I've
That's
read.
so sad. That's like, how do I
It's
read into that? You
awful.
know, like,
There's like a lot of people on Reddit who I've seen, they're like traumatized from their characters dying in the original game. They're like, oh, I can't bring myself to play the remake because I can't go through that again. But it's I mean, it's a game called A Wonderful Life. It sounds really facetious and cute, but I guess ultimately the message is, life is wonderful. Carpe diem. Just live your best life until you die.
my God, how did we get here? Lord,
How this game turn out to be darker than Final Fantasy 16?
Oh my God, I feel so like, I just feel a sense of relief, but also a sense of sadness, but a sense of completion. It's just like a weird thing. I think it's that's interesting. I've seen like the internet go up in flames a little bit about the like death mechanic, or I think I've seen the commentary as well that you mentioned, where the like having a child and like having it grow as well, like adds to this aspect that it's living and breathing, not just for you to cultivate this land. Like whenever you feel sad about your day job or something like that, and you can just like rely on this place. It's like, no, this place is living and breathing. It's just equally the same. But I think to your point, like the characters never really did it for me. Like I really don't like the art style, like of the big. I think like big head, small bodies, kind of like almost like that kind of like proportions. It just weirds me out. But on the flip side, like I'm still so jealous of people that grew up with these games, because as we talked about it on previous episodes, like I love Stardew Valley. Like my love and soul, Leah, who's my wife in Stardew Valley, we have a beautiful ranch and it's a beautiful home, and she's an artiste and I respect her craft, and she comes,
When was the last time you checked in on her?
me and Leah haven't seen each other in a couple of years, but I'm sure the farm is doing good. No, but it just goes back to this thing where it's like, as much as I love like my farming sim, which is Stardew Valley, right? It's like I'm itching to get back into something like that, and I'm trying to find the next new thing. But if you talk about the games industry as a whole, it's like there's so many farming sims that pop up on it seems like a monthly basis at this point, right? And it's almost like a joke about indie directs or wholesome directs and things like that. But at the same time, it's like I'm just waiting for the one to captivate me again, like Stardew did, and I hope that this one can captivate other people as well, like more options for people.
Yeah, I mean, art, you can't understate how important the art style is, especially for games where you're like half of the mechanic is building relationships. If you don't like what you're seeing on screen, you're just not going to be motivated. Like I said, the ugly dudes just didn't do it for me. I'm so glad they all got plastic surgery done, I guess.
Yeah. What's the final thoughts on Story of Season, A Wonderful Life?
It's a great game. I think if you're new to the franchise, it's a great one to pick up because of how easy they've made some of the mechanics, how likable the characters are, and fairly fast paced. Like I think you can grind the year up in a much shorter amount of time than previous titles. But if you don't like farming sim games, this is not the game to pick up. It's not going to change your mind. It's still very much a classic and doesn't have too much innovation. It's just sort of refined what the Harvest Moon Story Seasons franchise is known for. So don't expect, anything too crazy there. It's just really simple day on the life in the farm, which is kind of how I like it.
That's so cool.
Yes.
That's it. That's so cool. I'm
so you're happy for me.
We got to stop doing that bit on the podcast. Yeah, I'm really excited. That's super cool. Well, what do you have outside of this? What do you have in the horizon? Yeah. What's going on with you?
Nothing I can say too much about at this point, I think. But definitely 20M podcast listeners, tune in to the next episode where we'll be dropping more, I think, reviews on like upcoming games, really current games. We're trying to, I guess right now in our current direction, we're doing a lot more like new stuff as opposed to like just talking about the games we used to like before. So definitely keep an eye out for what we'll be working on soon. Anything you want to drop, Arief?
No, I'm just super excited about, like we need to acknowledge we've done so many live stream showcase reactions. We've been doing a lot of reviews for games that have been coming out. We are entering this phase where summer is here. There's so many games that are popping up, and there will continue to be a lot of games popping up. So for those that are longtime listeners of the podcast, we'll definitely be continuing a bit more games coverage. But I will say, we have some guests lined up as well on future episodes. So for those that, love the 20M podcast and love the conversations that we have with developers and people in the games industry, on the other side of the games industry who are making games and part of that, we've got some stuff coming up as well for you. But other than that, let us know your thoughts on, like, genuinely let us know like your reactions to Final Fantasy 16, and also like if you're a fan of Story of Seasons, like what do these games really like do for you? Because there's so much. I feel like there's so many associated memories with these types of games that you sink your life into. I just love to get that conversation about farming sims. And which one should I start next? Is it Story of Seasons, A Wonderful Life? I don't know. Let us know.
Yeah.
And you can check out the previous episode as well if you're overwhelmed by that and don't want to let us feed us in that way. What was the previous episode about?
We talked about wholesome games. We talked about Katamari. We talked about all the other games we saw in Xbox showcase. You're staring at me and I'm like, oh my God, I was not prepared for this pop quiz, but I think I got it right.
It's because I had no idea what we talked about on the last episode podcast. I threw
Honestly,
it to you
this week has
completely.
just been like wild. Like the amount of games we've played, the amount of trailers we've watched. Like what is life? Like summer is well and truly here, friends. So definitely check out our last episode where we covered all of the upcoming games from the showcases, our favorites, and also a review on We Love Katamari plus Royal Reverie Reroll is
Nailed
the
it.
name.
Nailed it. And that episode should be right here.
All right. We'll see you all soon.
20 MU later, everybody.